contacted me in advance to let me know she would be absent from today and tomorrow's meetings. With that, Denise, please call roll.
Deborah Neary. Here. Patsy Kojohns.
Here.
Lisa Fricke.
Here.
Maureen Nichols.
Here.
Rachel Wise.
Present.
Robin Stevens.
Here.
Patricia Tim. John Witzel.
Here.
Commissioner Bloomstead.
Present.
7 present, 1 absent.
Thank you, Denise. Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted on the east wall of this room on the south side of the door. Live web streaming will be available through the State Board of Education website. Board members, please engage your microphones before speaking and turn them off when you're done speaking. And please turn off your cell phones at this time. Thank you very much. We'll begin the meeting with one action item. We're going to put this ahead of our agenda items, and that's action item 7.7A, Santee Progress Plan. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Rachel Wise.
Thank you, President Witzel. Yes, under the agenda 3.7 Strategic Planning Performance Improvement Committee, one of our items for today is an action item. That action item is the approval of Santee Elementary, Middle, and High School Priority School Progress Plans. And as you know, we've been working with Santee for several years, and the committee was very fortunate to be able to go to Santee in September and have a preview of our presentation today. And so we are excited about our presentation today and about the plan that you will see that's presented in front of you today for our action. And we're looking forward to our colleagues who are not on the committee to certainly ask questions and be as informed as we have been. The committee is Maureen, Patsy, Lisa, and myself, so we're very fortunate to have a preview already. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shirley Vargas, who will be introducing our guests from Santee who are here today and setting up the presentation about the plan.
All right.
Thanks, Shirley.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and click this. Here we go. All right, so I'm here today to talk about Santee Community Schools and their progress plan update. I'm going to ask Superintendent Justin Hayes to join me, as well as Board President Moose. Thank you both for being present with me today and sharing all the great things that we have going on at Santee. So I'm going to start off by doing a quick brief introduction and overview of the progress and the planning process that we've done thus far. Talked about the major components. You have the physical plan in front of you. And then I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Hayes and Board President Moose, who has a presentation that I know he is eager to share with you all about the great work happening at Santee. So really quickly, I want to set the foundation in that our progress plan looks a little different than progress plans have looked in the past, and that's because what we're doing this year is taking the Nebraska MTSS implementation plan as their priority school progress plan. One of the things we know that many of our schools face is that they have multiple plans happening, and what we want to do is bring some coherence and alignment to that work. But I also want to make sure that we understand the language when I'm talking about MTSS. So really quickly, it's a framework for an integrated system connecting general education and special education to high quality standards-based instruction and intervention system. So it's matched to the students' academic, social, emotional, and behavior needs. So it's like building a house. I know Amy Rowan and company would definitely be like, you need your foundation. And one of the things that they have that's very specific and also very important to the MTSS process is this problem solving and decision making model. And I want to show you that as that is one of the foundational pieces. So MTSS offers us this model that you see here: identify, analyze, implement, reflect. Santee has taken it a step further and has created their own problem-solving model, and they call it RIDE, Our Way to Success, and they talk about recognizing the problem at hand, investigating that problem through data, developing and implementing interventions that are appropriate and necessary, and then examining that data and making necessary adjustments. So that is one thing that is something that is a part of our planning process, because it started actually before June 5th. So June 5th is the first thing on this timeline. I have another slide that's also wordy, but there's just so much work that has been happening, and I wanted to bring you up to date as soon as I can. And so here we've had multiple meetings with the Santee team around what are the foundational practices that are necessary to implement an MTSS implementation plan at the school. Since then, we've had multiple touch points and we've coordinated multiple meetings with the Santee Community Schools team to think about what is the vision, how do we prioritize the work that has been done, honoring some of the work that we've put in place for the last 3 years, and also recognizing that there is much room for improvement, and thinking about the fact that we're providing a different level of support here by providing a coach to our school board, which is something that we have not done in the past. So I wanted to make sure that I named that really quickly here. Also, just to make one quick note, on June 29th and June 30th was the Santee powwow, and I think that one of the beautiful things about partnering with Santee Community Schools is integrating ourselves as an agency into the culture as well and the community of the school. So I just wanted to make that quick note that we had some representation from NDE there, and I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that as well. So now bringing us up to date here, as Chair Wise mentioned earlier, we did present to the SPPI committee in September. They were present at the school, were able to engage with the community school in their rooms themselves, which was great to have them on site. And since then, we've incorporated that feedback into the plan that you see in front of you today. So we've added some things around concrete baseline data. We've added information around the evidence and artifacts that should be expected to be had at the end of this year. You should also notice that the plans are written for a 1-year goal, right? So we want to be mindful of the fact, like, what can we manageably see? What is realistic and intentional that we can see in 1 year? And so what we did as a part of prioritizing that work was identifying 3 major focus areas. I understand that in identifying Santee Elementary, Middle, and High School, this meant that we needed to have 3 specific plans. But what we did not want to do is just have a bunch of additional plans. So what we've done is you have in front of you Santee Community Schools, and it's broken up by these 3 areas. And in those 3 areas is the goal specifically written for the elementary school, for the middle school, and for the high school. And it's clearly delineated by a blue bar, so that way you can see where those goals are written. The 3 focus areas are literacy across the content areas, reduction in chronic absenteeism, and strengthening the transitions within, into, and between programs, post-secondary programs, and careers. This was all decided by the school community. We presented data, we presented all the artifacts that we've had done in the past 3 years, and collectively they decided this is something that we're going to do as an entire school community in conjunction with our school, with the local school board. The first one is around literacy across all content areas. And what we have here is the goal, and as you can see what's underlined, elementary, middle, and high school. One of the things that I want to clearly note here, though, is that we also must understand that some of the data is masked. And the reason why this data is masked is to ensure the privacy of student information. So we do not want to compromise our children by trying to create or ensure that we have, goals that are clearly identified or clearly understandable by others. We want to make sure we provide specific information and also any other indicators that could tell us that we're on track to meeting those goals. So that's where we also use MAP as a way to talk about and create goals that are tangible and also demonstrate growth while trying to reach proficiency. The second is a reduction in chronic absenteeism. So to remain consistent with our AQuESTT expectations, that's our accountability system, we are aiming to reduce chronic absenteeism by 5% each year. So what we have here are clearly written SMART goals that are showing a 5% reduction in chronic absence in elementary and middle and in high school. And then lastly is the strengthening of transitions. This one's a little bit more unique in that the transitions from elementary to middle and middle to high school and high school to life, really, right, will look a little different. So we have pre-K benchmarks here for elementary, thinking about the transition from a Head Start or a daycare or a pre-K program into kindergarten. Then from middle school, are our students on track to graduate on time? And then from high school, raising our graduation rates, also knowing that Santee High School is identified as a comprehensive support and improvement school based on their graduation rates alone. So we cannot miss this specific goal right here. So the physical layout of the plan is what you see here, and I believe it starts on page 7 or so. And what we have here, this is the way the MTSS implementation plan looks like as well. the alignment to AQuEST is something that we included specifically into this plan. Now, while the MTSS plan is in alignment with the AQuEST tenants, I wanted to make a clear distinction in each of the priority areas here. So we have the goal, the school. I decided to leave this one blank just so you can see what it looks like. There's just too much to put on the screen. But you can see that this also walks the school through identifying strengths and growth areas. So really thinking about what are some of the potential root causes as to why we're seeing the results we're seeing, and then ultimately writing down the action step with a strategy and then the appropriate activities and who's responsible. One thing that we definitely wanted to be clear about was who was responsible for what and by when. That is something that we wanted to make sure we had that clearly delineated in this plan. And then one of the pieces that's mostly related to the evaluation and the reflection, which is a formative check, is this idea of progress monitoring. So in the past, we've brought in front of you this 4-point scale that is a part of the Nebraska framework for continuous improvement. This is not a part of the plan, but I wanted to preemptively show this to you as something that you can expect from us in a few months, so that we're not waiting until June to determine whether or not the school has made enough progress to be determined as to whether to get off priority status or move forward, so whatever the case is. And I also wanted to make some alignment between the way we are showing progress on our own strategic plan, using some of the little to no progress, some progress, and significant progress made. So I just wanted to share those things with you really quickly. I know I'm talking really fast, but I want to give time for Superintendent Hayes to talk, and then I'm going to transition over to President Moose. So I'm going to pass the baton over here.
All right, thank you for having us today. And I'll keep it brief because when the committee came, I kind of hijacked the entire meeting for like about an hour and 45 minutes. And even hijacked it from Shirley. So, and I'll let Mr. Moose talk because he did prepare a presentation he'd like to share with you. But I just want to share a couple things we've done. Is when I came aboard, we really made a priority that we were going to get the community involved and we're going to do this together, because we can't intervene our way out of being not proficient. And the second thing was it had to be a community involvement. And so we started those things by just getting community involvement, by making appearances at our tribal council meetings, by inviting our tribal council into our school. And those are some things that hadn't been done in a long time there. And so that was one big party when I came. The other party is we want to make collective commitments as a staff. And so we wanted to get together as staff. We want to talk about what things we're going to stop doing and what things we need to continue to do. And just for an example, and I have a handout I'll give you guys, which has actually our collective commitments, which is things like empower students to be in control of their own learning, to stop making excuses. And those are just a few things, to communicate and collaborate. And so we really spent a lot of time talking about our collective commitments, which is what we refer to when we go back to our professional development throughout the entire year. I also spent a lot of time looking at our core curriculum and the content we're presenting to our students. And we are looking at and have started implementing curriculum revision process. I also have this, which was also presented to the Board of Education, in the terms of we actually writing curriculum that vertically aligns, that meets the standards, and then go out and finding the resource to make our core much stronger. And so those are just a couple things that we've done amongst many, many other things, but I do want to make sure that Mr. Moose has an opportunity to talk about all the things he wants to talk about. So, and I know he's prepared a presentation as well, so.
It's my turn?
Yeah, you're good.
It's not a very big presentation, so imagine a teenage kid giving his speech is going to be like planned for 7 minutes, but it's going to be more like 30 seconds. So, but I think
You tell me when you want to click it.
We're ready to go here.
Yeah.
Okay. This first, basically, what I want to keep it brief and go through. We have a coach the state has provided us by the name of Linda. Her name is Linda Richards. We have been working with her to determine steps we need to take to achieve our board priority. A lot of things our board is really discovering, and it's really remarkable, because in our community, where you think a board person gets boarded on a school board, you're in charge of everything. You have a say on everything, not the day-to-day operations. When they find that out, they can't determine that, we're only govern our policies, and it's a big wake-up call. So with Linda Richards coming in and helping us and with our meetings, it's given them a lot of opportunity to understand what a board member does, and it's really helping myself and with our new superintendent along the way, is that they have to stay back and let him run the day-to-day operations. So with her help, we are conducting assessments to better understand how we are currently approaching our board work. We are participating in the board development to assist us in obtaining more capacity for leadership. We are using supports to assist us as we make changes on how we govern. Okay. Like I said, I think it's a little early, but I'm still going to knock on wood. Still early, but I think I'm hoping we finally found our leader that we were looking for, because just the way everybody's talking in the community, with our collaboration and everything's coming together, it's been remarkable so far. It's only 2 months into the school year, but our homecoming was probably the best Santee's ever had this year, out of all 40 years of modern things.
Yeah.
So we had tribal council involvement, we had community involvement, we had everybody involved with it. Even our casino was involved. So I mean, it was something to see. So, but to continue on, the board is also following recommendations you see on this. I think it's in the second page,
Oh, this one?
page 2.
Yep, next one.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Next one.
Next one?
Yep.
Yep. The board will work through a 1-year development program designed specifically for building capacity for leading change and making school improvements more successful. Okay, page 3, please. Board development is an important part of the work we need to do over the next year. The board will attend the Nebraska Association of School Boards State Conference in November. The next page highlights the sessions that we will be attending for the Santee improvement. And we are extending our conference attendance to attend a retreat with Linda and NASB to do the work of our superintendent evaluation. Continue on from when the state board meeting is over, we'll continue on that Saturday with working on our evaluations for our superintendent as well, because it's not been done the way it's supposed to be done according to what our assessment was. So we're working on that this year. So page 4, the last page provides you with what I have been doing as the board president. I am proud to say that we are working on each board meeting to make the progress on our board priority, and there is a lot of work to do, but we are off to a good start. So that's it. That's it from me.
I think it's important to note that, Steve and I talk, we're having conversations prior to board meetings. We've done an entire policy update, so we spent some time at NASB already once for a weekend, and we did a policy update, and we started talking about some critical questions about, my role, their role, and everybody's kind of role and how we proceed and the things we do, and letting me, and there's been some tough times where I've made some decisions that are tough because it is a small community, and that's going to happen. And so, we spend a lot of time going through policies, making sure our policies are up to date, and making sure that they can govern, and then they can assess me and evaluate me on those things. And things like board reports, bringing data to our meetings, and that's one thing I think the committee could probably echo is that, we're having more conversations around using data to drive our decisions. So it's not just what we feel like doing, but it's actually bringing behavior data to our meetings and discussing those, and then we're sharing those things at board meetings. It's bringing our ADA attendance, so we know, and we're using those things, we're conscious of those things, and we're aware of those things. So when we make decisions, we know, and we can look at the data and see, well, what is our ADA right now for elementary school? What is our ADA? And we can identify who our chronic absentee students are, and we can really try to intensify the interventions we might need to try, or maybe we need to try a different approach with some of those students. And so we're really digging down and using the data to drive our decisions instead of just saying we're going to put everybody in intervention. So we're making wiser decisions using data, and that's been, I think the Mr. Muska also echoes that. That's one thing that the board has appreciated when they come to the board meeting, is that when we have board reports, we're sharing data about what's taking place in our schools so they can appropriately evaluate me. And it's not, and I say me because I'm the superintendent, but I have a great team that works together. It's not just me. I have great teachers and staff, and I have great paras, and I have a wonderful admin team that's doing a lot of work. And by no means is it easy, it's hard, but it's, we definitely have a lot of community support, which is great to see, and we're definitely going in the right direction in terms of those things.
And the admin team, where they presented their meeting to the board last meeting was Monday or Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
We had elementary, we had secondary, we had special education, and we had our preschool. Each one of them did a presentation on how things are going and their data and how they were bringing it to the board and how everything was going. And the board was really happy with the way that turned out, and the way Justin brought it, the way they all brought it to this board meeting, it was very good for our board to see. They never saw stuff like that before, so we're moving forward.
It's great. So with that, we'll take any of your questions, so thank you.
Thank you, and we do want to take questions and have an opportunity for discussion. I'd like to start out by thanking you again for being here, thanking you for allowing us to come as a committee to Santee. That was a great opportunity for us to have a deep discussion at a committee level about what your direction, your vision, your goals, and I appreciate that you're coming forward with, in essence, a one-year plan to really determine how do we take smaller steps. And I think that's one of our lessons learned that we need to think about from a priority school process. You know, you were part of our first, so it's a learning experience for all of us. But sometimes maybe trying to look at too long term when we need to first focus on what's immediate is really important. And I think that's where you've really stepped up this year. It's clear to see that you've really focused on what's the immediate right now and how do we start to move forward from there. So thank you very much for your hospitality, and thank you for being here today. So with that, questions from others? Maureen?
Yes, just a couple of them. You mentioned that you were going to be attending the joint conference of NASB and the others in November. Has the board attended in the past at all, this conference?
Yeah, we try to go to them every year, the state board particularly every year. So.
Okay, so you've been there in the
Yeah,
past.
yeah.
But all of you are going this year?
Yep.
And you'll have a different outlook on everything as well. And I like the idea
Not
of
just going to meetings and looking at and listening, but we're finally got an aspect of what they're actually listening to and taking it forward. So.
Yeah. My other question is, as I reviewed your progress plan after the three came up, and I was listening and watching online from my house, the superintendent, it's the last page. The superintendent will be an active member of the community, and you plan to attend local events and activities. To be a visible member, which I agree is highly important. Even have coffee downtown during the day with different folks. Will you be involving teachers and other administrators in that as well, or is that just kind of the expectation for them to show up to different events or local events?
So it started with the powwow. I went and met with the chairman of the tribe, and he invited me to come. I went to the powwow. I spoke at the powwow. Shirley and Lane were invited, as well as the entire admin team came, as well as teachers came. So we do encourage them. You know, obviously I can encourage them to come, but by contract sometimes I can't make them come. And so we did purposefully brought the tribe in, and so all the tribal council members were there for our opening. They all got to talk, give a little speak, and so we're really doing some cultural responsive things so our teachers can also understand where our students come from. So to answer your question is, my admin team is expected to be there. They had an end of the year bash. We got books. We had a table right there. They had a mechanical bowl and they had bounce houses, and we had a table with books. So you can probably imagine where the kids wanted to go, not the books. But just to show that we're trying to promote those things, and we were purposeful with making attendance matter. So we handed out attendance matters pamphlets, and so we are being very purposeful and being active and being present, and our staff do show up. There's a lot of cultural things we're getting back into doing with them together. Like Steve said, homecoming, I think we had a parade 6 blocks long, and every entity in town was involved. There was people on the streets, and we threw out candy and shirts and different things, and we had like a float, so we challenged our community partners and members like the Wellness Center and the Tribal Council and our school board to all have a float, and we had a contest. And so we are being very purposeful in how we get them to be involved and work together to open the door. So.
One kind of fun question at the end. And Steve, I don't know, do they do the sweat lodge there at Santee?
Sweat lodge is a pretty private thing.
You have to be invited in. I didn't know if you were inviting the superintendent or not.
I don't know if he's been invited yet or not.
You might want to be careful, it's a tough one.
But yeah, that's more of a ceremonial thing, so it's a spiritual aspect of it, so.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions?
Go ahead. Well, mine's fun too. So I wanted to come because I wanted to test out the fry bread. My grandmother used to make it for me, so every time I get a chance, I to get invited, I say invite me so I can
Well, I was
just.
thinking about how you said that now. We had a Indian taco sale down there today, so if I would have thought about it, could have bought everybody a taco.
Oh, yeah.
Robin, did you have a?
Yeah, I too just want to thank you for being here. Couple of questions. Linda Richards, that's the board coach, is
Yep,
that the way
yep.
I'm understanding that? And who is she affiliated with?
So actually, she was one of the ones that received a contract for this work that when we did our RFP process, so.
And she's independent, is that correct?
Yeah, as an independent
Okay.
contractor.
And like, does she come to every board meeting?
Yeah, she does.
Okay. All
She
right.
gives them homework.
Gives us homework.
I love
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I'm
We
sure.
get homework.
And just, how's the absentee rate? Have we seen some improvements in the first couple months?
Yeah, I shared at the last board meeting, currently our elementary was at 94%, average daily attendance, and our high school is 89%. So we need to ramp up, and I could go into the exact numbers of where kids were, but so roughly 6 of those students come from, 6 of our 22 chronically absentee kids come from PK or kindergarten, which is a concern. And so we need to make sure we address that because those behaviors are learned and then it becomes a pattern when you're in 7th and 8th and 9th
Sure.
and 10th grade. And so that was one conversation. And actually that's, I think, a shift too in how the board's working in that Linda has really worked with them on questions to ask us. And sometimes we have answers at admin team and sometimes we say, that's a great point. We do need to look at that. And so, that was some of the questions like they asked at the last board meeting was, well, how are you going to work with parents outside of just contacting them and working with the truancy officer and those types of things, and what other things are we going to do in those situations? Now, it also gets tough because we know in that pre-K, they're not required by law to be there, but we also know we need them there. On the flip side, I think it's important too that we do have roughly 10 kids in our Futures Academy, so that's like 12th plus grade, and so some of those kids, come twice a week to do their credit recovery, and some come 5 days a week, and so and I think the board understands that. We talked about that because they're willing to understand that our high school attendance rate might be a little bit low because of those things. And so some of those kids will be 21 this month. And so we are looking at just how we can potentially revamp our I guess I'd say alternative ed / 12 plus program, just because right now we do a lot of Apex, and if you have some reading struggles, it's really hard to do Apex. And so we're looking at some different ways of maybe we could modify that, but with also trying to focus on literacy and absentee. We thought that that's something we're working on, but it's not the top of our list right now, but it is on our list.
And then, have you started your MAPS testing?
Yeah, we are just finishing this week.
Okay, and that's going well, getting immediate feedback and.
And teachers are talking about it. I know, I'll just speak briefly about math. Some of our students had the highest growth we've seen. And I know our AQuESTT data is coming out, but there'll be some celebrations there as well as far as our maps and our growth we make on assessments, not necessarily maybe in SCAS or ACT, but when you look at the data for how our kids are doing as far as growth, I think there will be some celebrations there.
Good. And then my final question, just about your preschool age. What age do you have your preschool?
6 months on.
6 months
Yeah.
on. And any idea on percentages of kids that are attending?
So we have a 6-pence program.
Okay.
And so a couple of the students in there would be chronic absentee just because they come like twice a week with the high school or the 12 plus student who's doing the 12 plus students who are doing the Futures Academy. Then we have a 3-year-old room, a 4-year-old room, and we have the daycare. So we have a mixture.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Robin. Other, Lisa?
I want to make sure, did you have a question? I'm gonna turn on my microphone. I was part of the committee that came up to see you, and being there in person gave us a great perspective of where you were and where you're going. I was very impressed on several things. The superintendent and board president meeting before the board meetings, you're getting the training, you're going to NASB conferences, the data-driven decisions, the business and community involvement, and obviously observing you two talking and sharing relationships, and going in the right direction for the good of all students. I'm very proud to hear what you have to share, and looking forward to hearing even more.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Any other comments? Deborah?
First, just thank you for the amazing work you're doing. I can't remember, what's the length of Dr. Richards' contract?
All contracts are going until June 30th, 2020.
Oh,
so they're
wonderful.
For 1 year.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you.
So I just would like to thank you also again for being here. And one other piece I want to highlight is the work that you're doing. And I think moving to an elementary, middle, and high school approach, a full district approach, has so much merit. And really you've spoken to it in your plan and today, and even to the point of talking about your futures program and your program that really students may not all be on the same time clock. And so there may not be a 4-year graduation for all students, but you keep focusing on 5 years and 6 years and 7 years. And I think that, again, is such an important aspect when you're serving a student population of poverty, of needs, that you really are looking at a broader perspective, the engagement of the community, the commitment that goes beyond traditional 4 years. If it takes longer, how do we approach it? So again, thank you for what you've put forward in the plan. We're excited to monitor this year and see how things continue to grow and improve, but I think I can speak for the committee, at least from being there. We walked away with a sense of confidence that the plan is moving in the right direction, and we look forward to the ongoing updates. Lisa, did you have another?
I just happened to think of one more question. When you, when we were there, you shared the excellent resources that you were able to purchase, and you were going to start developing curriculum. How is that progressing?
Good, and I actually just gave Shirley, there's my little handout that has our curriculum development process, and so, you know, I will say that it's been wonderful having my coach as well, and Dr. Masbach, because she's a curriculum guru, and so I lean on her a lot just because as superintendent, you know a lot of things, but sometimes you don't know everything. You never know everything about that. And so she's been a great resource for me and helped me, because sometimes I have big picture ideas. You know, sometimes as superintendent, we have big picture ideas, and you need that person to say, hold on, let's focus a little, you know, focus in on this again. And so we have set, so currently we have purchased Amplify, and so we have been implementing that. That was done through a process with NDE and the school last year. The last couple years, I believe, is what I was not there, but I just speak. They had a process they went through and a plan they went through. And so we are going to have 4 days in June where we bring on our ELA staff, and we're actually going to write curriculum. And so we're going to go back and we're going to look, and they had done some crosswalking already with standards and where it was at, but then actually nail it down and get to here's the curriculum, and then here's Amplify, and so they're going to take and match those up and what really needs to be taught. And so you will see on there that there's an estimation or a phase, and it goes through the next 5 years, and it shows you the phase of, you know, purchasing and studying and analyzing and then buying the resources and those types of things. And so it does lay that out in there.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Patsy?
It's going to be so much more comfortable for you now, going the right direction. You know, buying the materials and then trying to make them fit afterwards is so hard. That you've turned it around, and from now on it'll be a lot easier. And I didn't have the opportunity. I was so worried about fry bread that I didn't have the opportunity to tell you thank you very much for having me there as well as the rest of the group. And I indeed felt like I was in a room of people who were really working with their whole entire souls to make this school improve, to make it work for the benefit of their children, and it was all over the room.
Well, every one of you got an open invitation to come to Santee for fry bread. Actually, I think we got
Road
the
trip.
best fry bread.
Be careful what you
You're
offer
asking
me.
for
Best fry bread maker we got is our head maintenance person at the school. He makes some excellent fry bread, so I'm sure we can get something going.
I'm sure some of us will be back, so,
Oh, President
thank
Witzel
you.
has that invitation.
As well, thank
Yes,
you. And so
thank you.
that is coming tomorrow. The approval of the plan is coming tomorrow as an action item on our business meeting tomorrow.
Thank you, Rachel.
John.
Thank you very much. We'll continue on with the Commissioner's report and agenda overview, consent agenda process. Commissioner Bloomstead.
Yeah, I'll just take the chance to also say thanks to, first of all, Shirley and our team that's done so much work, and thanks, Steve. Always good to see you.
Yeah.
Great
Thank
to
you.
get to see you
Thank
as
you,
well.
Commissioner.
First of all, the consent agenda process, like normal, any items on the consent agenda that you'd have questions about. I forget what color our form is. They changed it on there. I guess that's lavender. I'm going to call that form. You can fill that out and give it to Scott Summers or put it in that box, I guess, instead. I have a report on rules, and I let my computer go dormant on me here, so I'll pull it up. Oh, he says me ready. So with the report on rules, we have some rules awaiting governor's approval, Rule 11, and then Rule 46 and 53 that are both waiting for that approval from the governor. And then we have scheduled public hearings on Rule 21 and Rule 24. And actually, I think tomorrow we'll have a little bit of a presentation from Fremont that gets some more background information as to what we're proposing on Rule 21. So that's the update on rules. And then I think we go ahead and move on. Lane Carr is going to come up. I'll give a little bit of introduction on this. As you all know, I believe next Wednesday, October 9th, Shirley's joining him, as obvious. I have that figured out. But we're releasing the AQuESTT classification, the Nebraska Education Profile next week. A slight, well, I won't call it a slight improvement, an improvement in time frame from where we were last year. I believe last year we were able to get those results out in December. And thanks to a lot of hard work from folks all across the agency, but Lane, I would give some special recognition, keeps everybody rolling on that particular front, takes on a lot of that responsibility to make sure that happens. And then as we release that information, obviously we aren't ready to release it yet today, so I think just giving you a little bit of overview before that goes public, give a little bit of background on what we hope with this. And I think also we're releasing something new this year that was not last year, and that's the TSI, Targeted Support and Improvement, as well as the additional Targeted Support and Improvement, which is part of our federal ESSA plan. So I'll turn it over to Lane and Shirley.
Awesome. Thanks, Commissioner, and thanks for allowing us an opportunity to speak with you. As the Commissioner mentioned, next Wednesday is a big day for us as we release these classification reports to the public. And part of that, as the Commissioner kind of foreshadowed, is this new designation for support. And that's really around Targeted Support and Improvement, or TSI, and Additional Targeted Support and Improvement, ATSI. And these are federal designations, but they also have their roots in some of the work that you've already outlined with us. So I asked my colleague Shirley up here again because I want her to be able to share with you some of the communications and supports to our schools. In addition to that, we want to make sure that you understand first why we're doing TSI and ATSI designations, the rationale behind that. We also want to make sure that you have at least a high-level understanding of how schools are identified for targeted support and improvement and additional targeted support and improvement. And Shirley and I have actually done something similar to this presentation about 4 times now, twice with our schools that have early indication of their TSI and ATSI designation, and also with our ESU colleagues, and then with our staff here at NDE as well. So we're excited to be able to share that with you so that, again, you have just that high level understanding. I wanted to start with the why. So why are we doing this in the first place? And it really boils down to our commitment as a state board and the NDE towards educational equity, with specific focus on this idea of educational resources. So Santee is actually a prime example of being able to focus on the needs of the school and providing that school with the resources that they need to serve their students, right? So that's what we're trying to do as a school improvement organization, to find out the unique needs of a school and then to allocate those resources, whether that's our time, our energy, or some of the things that Shirley's gonna share, which are just resources that are available to those schools. It's also a conversation around high expectation for learning for every student in the state of Nebraska. Students with disabilities, students of color, students who may not be proficient in English yet. So holding those high expectations is such an important thing and a message that we're spreading with our TSI and ATSI designation. I would also just share that there have been 2 recent actions from you that have also reinforced the need for specifically supporting schools in supporting their student groups. So I think to your equity lens, which is on the left, and then the commitment that you codified through our position statement on non-discrimination and equitable educational opportunities. So as we at the department think of the ways to put those into action and serve our schools, we think that TSI and ATSI is really a start and the operationalization, at least in part. So TSI and ATSI again begins to put this practice, put our commitment to equity into practice. So I just wanted to start by kind of grounding ourselves in a quotation from some partners that we have with the Midwest and Plains Equity Center. And this is the idea that opportunity gaps precede achievement gaps. So we as educators need to focus on creating equitable opportunities for our students to learn. And in the past, we've put the responsibility for those achievement gaps on the students or on their families, rather than on the adults in the system. And so we're learning together too. That's a shared responsibility that we also commit to. How can we provide equitable opportunities to learn for all of our students? Excellent. The other big reason that this is being implemented now is because of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So recall that ESSA is the reauthorization of ESEA. It's the replacement for No Child Left Behind. And this federal law requires that our state education agency, us, identify schools for support for overall underperformance and then specifically for low student group performance. And unlike NCLB, this is much more about thinking about the resources that a school already has in place, the resources that we at the NDE and ESUs, our community partners can come together, leverage those to address the opportunity gaps. So those 2 reasons, your recent recommitment to educational equity, and then the federal timing with the ESSA law coming into place. So I've shared this before with you, the designations, the supports that we have. We have 2 processes that go on for every school in the state. The first is classification, and that's that excellent, great, good, and needs improvement. Every school gets a classification. Again, a state law that mandates that classification yearly. In addition, we're thinking about the ways we support schools. That's that designation, and we have 3 ways that we're doing that. Again, our Comprehensive Support and Improvement Schools, or CSI, that's a federal requirement as well. There were 27 schools that were identified last year. You just heard from one of our priority schools and the awesome work that they're doing. And that's another way, yet another way, the most intensive way that we support our schools. And then over to the right, the targeted support and improvement and additional targeted support and improvement, which has to do with student group performance. And that's what I wanted to make sure that we're clear about today. What does that look like? How do schools get identified? And how are schools supported? So once again, I point out the 10 student groups that we're discussing or that are under consideration. So we have our 7 racial and ethnic groups. We have economically disadvantaged, or those students that receive free and reduced price lunch. We have English learners, and we have students with disabilities. So those are the 10 student groups that we're basically coming into focus on, and the performance of those student groups at the school level. So while on average, your school may appear to be performing a certain way, we want to zoom in and see if every student and each student group is having those same opportunities to learn. Do you want to speak about this, Shirley?
Yeah, so the way we've been trying to conceptualize the way we support our schools is through a similar multi-tiered system of support. So our foundation or our core is the supports we provide to all of our schools, and we are able to identify those schools through our classification system. Every school falls into that category. Through this designation process, we're able to more clearly articulate and identify schools to receive additional supports to improve. As we move further up that triangle, our supports are not only differentiated, they're also intensified. So I'm going to speak to you a little bit further about those supports specifically to TSI and ATSI schools. We already support our CSI schools through a more prescriptive type of way, and then our priority schools, like Lane mentioned, are most intense, state-directed, and somewhat at times state-led improvement effort is what you have in front of you here.
Thanks. So, kind of put another way, we can serve our schools better by serving them differently. So let's talk about TSI and how schools are identified for targeted support and improvement. So we basically ask a series of questions of a school. So this filter, this blue triangle that you see here, it's actually a result of not wanting to rank our schools. So we don't rank our schools from 1 to 1,004. That makes it tough then to serve our schools differently, right? But we came up with a unique way to find those schools that need more support, and specifically here then for targeted support and additional targeted support. So here's the questions we ask ourselves when we're going through this process of identifying schools. We first say, does the school serve at least 10 students in a given student group? Does the school serve at least 10 students in that given student group? In this stage 1, then we're looking at, are the students meeting certain proficiency standards? Are the students in that student group meeting proficiency standards? And our proficiency standard, what we're comparing that student group's performance to, is the lowest 25% of Title I schools. So we're saying, is this student group performing at or below the performance of the lowest 25% of Title I schools? That's just a comparison. We have to have some sort of comparison group, and that's the comparison group that we decided upon as this was written into our ESSA plan. In that first stage, we also say, if this student group also contains English learners, are those students progressing towards proficiency? Okay, so there's 2 parts to that first one. And I'm going to actually share with you some of the numbers as we go through here, and then you'll be able to see the filter in action as we go through. So we ask, are they proficient? Are they meeting progress towards proficiency in English learning? The second stage is all about growth, all about progress. So there's a misconception that this designation is about student performance at a certain given time, at one point in time. Stage 2 is debunking that myth, is what we're trying to do. With stage 2, we're saying, all right, we know that students in this student group aren't meeting proficiency standards, but are they at least growing towards proficiency? So we look at 3 separate measures of that. We look at improvement, which is about that student group's performance over time. We look at growth, which is student-to-student growth from year to year. And we look at non-proficiency reduction. So is the number of students in that student group being reduced over time? So that was a key piece of learning for our schools as we've been sharing this out, is that there wasn't a fully understanding about the growth aspect to this model. And then the last piece, this stage 3, SQSS, is school quality and student success. School quality and student success. And this was a federal requirement as well to identify those. So we have 3. We use the EVA, we use science, and we use chronic absenteeism. And so I've simplified this final step, but in essence, we're asking, all right, are the students in this student group coming to school? So is that school reducing chronic absence for that student group? Is that student group performing well in science? And what are the quality indicators of that school? And how are the students in that student group being benefited by those? So those are three basic, simple questions that we're asking as we go through this process. So let's look at an example. This is an actual example from our state. We're looking at the economically disadvantaged student group, those students that receive free and reduced price lunch. So there are 676 elementary or middle schools that serve at least 10 economically disadvantaged students. After we go through the question, that first stage about status and progress toward English language proficiency, we end up with 276 schools that are entering that stage 2. We then have 256 schools. So put another way, after stage 2, we're basically seeing that the economically disadvantaged students in this student group aren't proficient, and only 20 were making progress over time for that student group. And then I'm going to leave this last question, the last number here, but ultimately we end up with a number of students, student groups and schools that are designated for that student group. So again, that data is embargoed until next week, so I didn't want to share that here. But you can see in general how that filtering process goes. ATSI then, additional targeted support and improvement. The only big difference here is around the comparison group. So whereas before it was the lowest 25% of Title I schools, here it's the lowest 5% of Title I schools. So ATSI is a much more urgent need. It's a lower performance for that student group. And so we're putting a lot more emphasis on that as well. Excellent.
All right, so that was a lot from Lane, and now you have a lot from me. So now we move from we've identified schools, we've classified them as excellent, great, good, needs improvement. They've been designated one of those potential designations, and now, so the now what is important. And what we first want to do is talk about the communication. And what we've done here is that since the approval of our plan back in June of 2018, we've had multiple sessions during administrator days. We've talked about some of these things during our data conferences. We've also shared a blanket communication to all superintendents across our state in early August to let them know that this was something that was coming. So since the inception of our plan, or at the very least since the approval of our plan, we've been communicating this out to our schools. We've broken up the communication into 3 stages to schools that have been identified. We thought about the first phase, calling it awareness, and the fact that we want to hold some information sessions. We've had a few webinars, and Lane mentioned earlier these different presentations to different groups around what are the requirements, what are the supports available, and just clarify this process. So I think people hear TSI and it's like, what does that really mean? So I appreciate Lane being able to then break that down even further and thinking about there's a methodology to this process. We've also provided an FAQ document that can be accessed on the AQuESTT website. The second piece is exploration, which is what I'm going to talk about in a moment. And those are those tangible supports that our schools can tap into, such as a resource that is called Leading for Equity in Our Schools. I'll show you a snapshot of that. I'll also walk you through really quickly a needs assessment and a planning guide that we have available. The last piece is action. So we also want to make sure and continue to communicate that this is a district-led improvement effort for schools that are identified as targeted support and improvement, TSI, or additional targeted support and improvement, ATSI. What that means is that our districts, in partnership with ESUs and others, are to think about what are some of the things they already have in place, right? We're not asking to throw everything out new or think about something brand new, but really consider what are the ways in which we can better serve the student group that was specifically identified at that school. So we are going to also offer a regional technical assistance session for our ATSI schools. So like Lane mentioned, ATSI is a school that has a student group that if on its own was a school would be performing at or below the performance of our lowest 5% of Title I schools. So this is a much more intense need. So we want to provide on-site, side-by-side assistance to those schools. And then lastly is an equity summit. That's something that's forthcoming in the spring, in which we'll bring our ATSI and TSI schools together to think through, right, what are some of the things that we could be doing a little bit differently, engage in some critical conversations, and then walk away with some tangible next steps. And I think we'll talk about that in a moment. So like mentioned, ESSA only requires us this notification piece, but we know that it's our obligation and our responsibility to ensure the equitable education of every single student in our state. So not only are we asking districts to develop and maintain that plan, the ND also reserves the right to then go into a district and talk about, well, what supports are you providing to a school? Talk to us how you're differentiating that support to a school that has been identified for a student group. And now we're going to share with you some resources that we have specifically for these schools. The first is Leading for Equity in Our Schools resource. Like mentioned in the past, this resource is designed to provide our educators. Educators are those that are district administrators, school leaders, paras, teachers, anyone with touch points with students, the mindsets, beliefs, and dispositions that are necessary to engage with our students in the most culturally appropriate way and to ensure their success in their school. There are 9 modules, 7 of which are full of content around cultivating opportunity, thinking about our individual and implicit biases that may be at play, understanding the effects of trauma, understanding the diverse needs of our students regardless of their ethnicity and their race and their language ability, as well as specifically their ability. And that is a live link which can be accessed. I also have this information on our website.
And by the way, you can do this. I've learned so much. There's really useful and awesome resources in there, videos, little quizzes. So there's tons of really cool stuff that you can find.
So I want to say that this also wasn't just like, let's put what feels good. This is very much research and evidence-based practices that have been curated in such a way to provide tangible supports to our schools. We also know that we wanted something that could be self-paced and could be done in an existing system or an existing structure that a school or a district may have. So we provided a facilitator guide that anyone in a school or a district can use to lead those critical conversations and bring people together. We also have a reflection guide. So those that are participating and are receiving this as a professional learning tool can engage in what are some of the reflections. Like, let's take a minute and stop. What are we doing? What are some things we can enhance? Or I wonder why something like this occurred, whatever the case is. These are just some prompts that our schools can have engaging in that conversation. The other piece is a comprehensive needs assessment. This needs assessment was created in partnership with our regional education laboratory and thinking about what are the things that must be in place that when they are all working in tandem are creating or providing our students the best educational experience. So these are grounded in our 6 tenets of AQuESTT. So while we have our EBA that's kind of done at the end of the year, this kind of serves as a precursor or almost as a baseline, so to speak, as to where we are in relation to a tenet. A school can decide to do it either all in one entirety. They can do it either by tenant, or they can do a screener that based on that data tells you actually this is the tenant you should focus on. And we also have instructions there and best practices around it, doing it in a team process. And the last piece we have here is an improvement planning guide. So like I mentioned, we have our schools that have a ton of different reports and plans that they're submitting for whatever reason. We're not asking schools to create districts to create a brand new plan. However, we are asking schools to engage in critical conversations about the data they're collecting, about what are some contributing factors to the outcomes that they're seeing, and whether or not they're selecting the appropriate intervention to address that root cause that they have found. So what we've done here is created this guide that can complement, for example, an implementation plan for MTSS or a targeted improvement plan or a CIP, continuous improvement plan that they already have in place. We want to make sure that our schools are being really intentional and meaningful about the student group that was identified, and also knowing that our student groups are in one identity marker, right? The intersectionality of these pieces are really important. So we want to make sure that that's something that they're engaging in those conversations, and this guide can help them do that in that way.
So thank you for sharing that. And just as some closing thoughts. So the point of targeted support and improvement and additional targeted support and improvement, I once heard this saying about not calling out people, but calling them into conversation. And I thought that was especially appropriate now as we talk about student groups. Let's talk about disaggregating data and some of the root causes behind that. It's also a federal requirement through the Every Student Succeeds Act, and it starts to deliver upon the board's commitment to educational equity. And just as Shirley was mentioning with that triangle, just like teachers do in the classroom with students that have diverse needs, we also as a system need to think about the differing needs of our schools. And we do think that TSI is one of the ways that we can do that.
Any questions? Rachel.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that really was outstanding presentation that really laid out where we are and where you're going. So I just want to thank you for the comprehensive nature of that presentation and of the direction that you are leading us in this process. I think that many of the things you just shared resonate well with conversations we're having around approval, accreditation, and accountability from a bigger picture, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in a committee report, but this just really ties so many of those pieces together with the work you've done, so thank you so much. Top notch.
Deb Neary.
Ditto what Dr. Weiss said. Very inspiring, and ties back to what we were talking about earlier in our Student Success Committee today with our equity lens, and the importance of that as people who are in leadership decision-making positions, you know, to use that to think, to understand the diverse needs of our students. And I was pleased to see, in looking at the progress plan for Santee, you know, one of the things they talked about to improve in attendance today was to improve the culturally appropriate and relevant, you know, instructional materials. And it is a new way of thinking about the way we educate our students. And there's an analogy, if you'll just bear with me for 1 second, but this just really resonated with me when I heard it. And it's, you know, if you were walking around a lake on the sidewalk and all of a sudden you saw a few fish dead on the sidewalk, you might not give that any thought. But if you saw a pile of dead fish on that sidewalk, then you might think to yourself, like, we don't need to fix those fish, we need to fix the lake. And I kind of see this work as we're fixing the lake. I mean, we're finding ways to improve our educational systems and take out some biases and make them more culturally responsive to our subgroups, and that's very exciting. Had anyone heard that analogy before?
No.
Okay.
I'm gonna use it.
Okay.
I'm so happy to see us addressing the student groups in several of the equity conferences and convenings that I have attended. This is kind of the reverse of what you said, but still, I think just as powerful. And what I kept hearing over and over again is if we want to make progress in changing equity for the better, we have to take a look at our student groups and start with them. And usually we just look at this big picture and think, well, somehow we're going to make this big picture better. But a little bit at a time, addressing student needs and student groups, it might not be as glamorous as, you know, doing a whole statewide kind of review and everything's going to be better. But what that does is a little bit at a time, baby steps for real kids, real students in our schools who need us to address their issues so that they can learn and go out and be successful. So that's why your presentation was so inspiring to me. And of course, it's about equity. And I was glad to see our equity lens in there and see it functioning. So thank you for that as well. Amazing presentation.
Any other questions?
I just realized how much work this had to have been, not only for you, but for staff. But I appreciated everything. But what hit me was the idea of opportunity gaps, and that you said it precedes the achievement gap. And then the huge piece about communication, where you've had communication is so important. The awareness meeting providing tangible supports and action that's district-led. My question is, you talked about, and also the regional tech assistance. My question is, you're going to have a spring equity conference in 2020. I think that's amazing. Will this be done in 2 parts of the state or in a central location? Because to me, that's kind of the culmination of everything. People have further questions, direction. That could be a data point of resource of what's next or what's to come. So have you had any thoughts about where that's going to be?
I chuckle because we continuously talk about like, so what are the actual details? But so that's something that we're deciding. I think what we need to do first is just map out literally the geographic location of our schools and the schools that have the student groups that are identified, so that we have a better idea of where we're going to go. And knowing that it'll take a toll if we were to do it in one particular location for any of our schools to attend. So we may consider doing something that may be east and west, or something that could be a little bit more manageable for schools. So we're currently in the works on that. So
Thank you for that consideration.
Yeah.
That's an awesome plan. Thank you, thank you.
Any other comments? I just got one question. Did you have a question? Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, I just agree with what I'm hearing here, the many thanks, the hard work. This is kind of the second time you've presented in front of us, and then I'm starting to get it just a little bit. And I read quite a bit about it in our last board packet and that sort of thing. So again, you're doing an outstanding job in trying to educate us to understand this better and better. Just have a question and looking for your advice. Superintendent comes up to me, says special education is the only subgroup that we're having. What would be the needs improvement? Would that be the right term to use?
Targeted support and improvement. Yeah, targeted support.
TSI, all right, or maybe a TSI, all right, good. See, I'm learning. All right, but then that superintendent comes up to me and says, I don't know what to do. I think we've done everything. We've looked at your interventions, all the resources that you have given to us as superintendents and to special ed directors and special ed teachers, but yet we just can't get special ed up. I'm never going to be an excellent school, even though I think I'm an excellent school. So what do I say to that person? Keep trying?
Yeah, we got Steve back here. This is what we're getting.
I must admit, I never expected the answer to come from that side of the aisle there.
I'll highlight. We've had a lot of deep conversations inside the agency about those very things. I get very concerned that superintendents or the public or anyone would start to blame a subgroup that they couldn't be in another position. And instead, I really want folks focused on, hey, look, you have a subgroup that's not performing as well as it could. You know, part of it is we've really tried to focus on growth, and we want to ensure that's going to be the case as we go forward. But I think in particular, we've had some great conversations around special education because that's one area in which I can guarantee you all over the state of Nebraska we have special education students. Someone might say, well, I don't have English learners, or I don't have maybe poverty, or I don't have certain group. Well, you're going to find that special education is among the categories where people should be able to relate. And I want to turn it over to Steve just to talk to a little bit of that question.
Yeah, and we'll be glad to. We have had recent conversation about that, and I don't want it to be the elephant in the room that we don't talk about, because we're going to see that across, as we know, across districts and so forth. But the reality of it is, we do need to talk about how we are supporting and instructing our students with disabilities, and not be afraid to say, hey, special education students, we need to intensify. We need to step it up in how we're instructing all students, and particularly those students with disabilities across all of our educational facets, not just special education classrooms, but regular education as well. So this is going to show us that we cannot be afraid to talk about it. Special ed can be a soft, safe place to instruct kids. It needs to be a place where we step it up. And where we're not afraid to intensify the instructional rigor. We're not afraid to measure and say, hey, how are we doing? If we're teaching the same way in December that we were in September and we're not making growth, we better be making adjustments. So I think this gives us the opportunity to really talk about that and not be afraid to talk about that. And we're going to be doing that, I'm sure, due to this information. Does that help?
Yes.
Any other questions? I'd like to just ask a quick question, if I may, and I'll be very, very quick on regards to this. But in regards to our targeted support groups, our students, if you will, how does that differ from the targeted groups in ESSA?
They're the same.
It's identical.
Yeah,
Are they
the same
identical?
groups.
If that's the case, I don't see, if you will, migration students, I don't see military students and so forth in regards.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the 10 student groups that are here are slightly different from the student groups that we report on. So highly mobile students,
Yes.
Students who have a parent or parents that are involved in the military,
Yes.
students that are in the foster care, justice involved youth, those we report on, so that data is available on the NEP or will be available on the NEP, and we don't use those student groups or identify those student groups for targeted support and improvement.
So, I mean, back to that point, just to kind of reiterate, ESSA requires two different things with two different groups, and so it requires that we report on
Yes.
certain subgroups, but not all subgroups are required underneath targeted support and improvement. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, Rachel.
But I think you bring up a really good point. That wouldn't preclude us if at some
Yes.
point we determine that it's important for us to do so. Those are things that, ESSA gives us the opportunity to go beyond. And so there are things that we could talk about, as we move forward. Are there things that we need to look at? Are there other aspects? So I do think you bring up a good point that it's important for us to think about all subgroups, not just those that are identified for the additional targeted support, but those that we report on as well. And monitor that and think about that and determine if it has an impact that we need to address sometime down the road.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, Mo.
Robin, I just kind of want to go back to what you were talking about. Sometimes I think administrators begin to feel like, oh, we've got this group. This isn't making us look very good, and it's not making me look very good. And we've got to get beyond that concept to say, we have to take care of all kids. All means all. And if we need to step up to the plate, let's get going on it. I think that's what too many administrators worry about, is that they're being looked upon. And it's not about them, it's about the kids and what are we doing to intensify to help them.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lenny and Shirley.
Thank you.
So, I'm trying to test and see how much more time you want to spend right now, or if you were gonna do anything else, John. So
Well, I was
you're
gonna ask if you
keep
wanted quarterly reports.
Yeah, so I can do the quarterly
Absolutely.
report, so, all right. So, first of all, and I'm gonna have Ryan come up so we can actually display, kind of the overview of the strategic plan quarterly report. I wanted to highlight just kind of one thing around process. Is the board adopted the revision of the strategic plan, and first of all, just thanks for that work. I think thanks for kind of the organization of that work, which makes it manageable from an agency perspective as we have conversations about what the strategic plan looks like. And you may have, I see some of you at least do, you may have this kind of two-page handout. And I would turn your attention to the kind of the part of it that actually has some of the indicators that I want to focus on. Number one, as you know, you adopted a strategic plan that has both measures of progress and aspirational measures of success. I'm going to focus today on our measures of progress, and in part because that report that you just heard, there's a lot of new data coming in, and I would anticipate in the next quarter to really do a deeper dive into those aspirational measures of success, which are, for the most part, the types of data that we look at from student achievement and school related data that we gather within our NEP. And so as we're releasing that, it'll allow us to do that particular data look. But also, because of the arrangement of the strategic plan now with 3 different goals, we took those measures of progress and have them aligned, as you did, underneath strategies and some of the activities that are in place. On this, and I'll just maybe use as an example, you have leadership in the upper left-hand corner, and it describes the strategies that I'll just read this one for the example's sake. Provide leadership in high-quality services in processes, regulations, interagency collaboration, data systems, fiscal responsibility, and evaluation that enhance the success of education systems in Nebraska. A pretty big strategy, but we also identified some very specific or more specific measures of progress. As you know, we've gone through a lot of work to organize the agency in such a fashion. The very first measure there shows an indication on that we've organized the NDE through personnel and processes to improve leadership in school support systems, regulations, interagency collaboration, data systems, fiscal responsibility, and evaluation that will enhance the success of educational systems in Nebraska and by 2020. A lot of our work over the last 2 years has included a reorganization of the agency, as you know. What we've done now is that we have, across our 3 divisions of the agency as they exist, I ask the deputies on one hand, certainly our officers, and then all of the administrators across the agencies to kind of take stock of where we're at. And tell me whether or not we've made little or no progress, or some progress, significant progress, or that we believe that it's complete. That's our basic idea. So this is where I think we are relative to that. It's not necessarily where you think we are, and that's part of the ongoing feedback and I think the intentions of those quarterly reports, but to give you a sense of where I think we are on these various measures. And I will say, I'm not putting this in front of you to say that we've completed everything. In fact, you'll see indicators on here that we haven't completed anything. In fact, you'll see some where I don't believe we've made as much progress as we want to be making yet. But it starts in a process across the agency where we have monthly meetings, actually more than monthly meetings, twice a month meetings with the cabinet, which means the officers, deputies, and the administrators across the agency, to have conversations and have dialogue. This will become part of our regular routine of how we look at where we're making progress. Where do we need to spend resources, time, and attention to be able to make a difference on something, and how do we get those things done? On each one of these measures, and I'll go to another one, I'll go to the flip side of one that shows that we have little or no progress. Develop and maintain a professional learning directory to include high-quality professional learning opportunities for teachers, service providers, school leaders, local school board members. Even what you just heard around what we're doing on priority schools, what we're rolling out relative to improving services for schools that are identified as TSI and ATSI, are part of those particular efforts. But we've not taken that where we yet need to go, in my view, of what we would envision behind that particular measure. We're starting to build some of those particular processes, for instance, but it's really important that we look at each one of those. There's several things on here. I think a point where we look at it, and we've had this discussion among leadership in the agency. What's complete mean, right? And actually, I'm not sure I quite know either, right? So you look at complete, and I think the notion of equity lens, we actually mark that as complete, but I'm not sure that's ever complete. So there's kind of a next step underneath those strategies that we talk about, right? So I think it's important for us to constantly be reviewing this, but it's a starting point for a conversation. I anticipate this will be not just in this format, but also on our website on a regular basis. We had looked at kind of an annualized process. If you look at the underneath education vision or Nebraska education vision I forget if it's org or com now off the top of my head, you can actually see that there's been updates to what that website looks like. Eventually that will include these kinds of measures on that website, so you can be clicking in and going, what's the deeper dive conversation behind each one of those particular efforts as well. So my intention over time is that continues to be built as much more of a live, interactive type of experience for others that might look at it, but it also puts us in a position that these quarterly updates, I want something that you can actually take around and say, here's where we're at. So we're trying to manage both of those things for you, so you have that in front of you all the time. So I'll stop there. There's probably 1,000 other things I could probably say to this, but certainly would take some questions, and we could look through some other things if you'd like.
Rachel.
Thanks, Commissioner. A couple of questions I have is twofold. One is around the commissioner appraisal. Oops. One is around the commissioner appraisal process, and the other is around the porting of this. And I don't know if you've given thought to when there are, in particularly items that are completed, is your intent that you will put those up on the website wherever we were just a minute ago that show the documentation of completion? Whether it be, for example, the baseline data of ACT with goals that are developed, whether or not you'll link to a document that shows that, and if it's in progress, that's part of the evaluation process, that it's in your evidence file. Have you kind of given a thought to how much will become available at a click to the full world versus how much goes into kind of a part of the
I think
evidence of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think kind of in both arenas. As we're able to get it, I actually want some of this up on the website for a click to the whole world, because there's nothing, I mean, our evidence on, the documentation around some of these different projects have a lot of details that might go into it, like I'll pick on the organized NDE. Some of those things might be in the background that are showing up there, but we might have certain kind of key indicators that would be listed in the public site, so to say. But you've seen like org charts as we do different things, and that's the type of evidence that I would put in the appraisal process side of the equation as well.
What I would like to encourage is, in particular, anytime something is complete, that either the evidence file or to everybody in the web-based file, there be some tangible evidence of that. If it's something that's completed around a baseline, or if it's an org chart of some sort or whatever, that we can go to that and say, oh yeah, that is finished, because here's what it looked like.
Yeah, I think as it kind of develops, and kind of as we, I was going to spend nights doing computer programming, but I mean, as it gets developed, really it becomes that becomes our site where all that stuff is becoming available. Folks would be able to, like we did, why do we show, Ryan, kind of just the click-through, and I know this is from the evidence or the documentation that we put before, but for instance, kind of how the mechanics might work, you click on one of those measures of progress or measures of success, and it would be able to pull up some of that information that might tie to that work. Right. And that's the intention, so some of that gets into that routine, so.
Great, thank you.
That's the mechanics of it anyway.
Lisa.
Just a quick question. When I'm thinking, one of those, to me, I can't remember which one, seemed like it should be an ongoing goal or aspiration. And I was wondering, could we just put ongoing, and maybe it's looked at annually, and then a click to show how it's done over that year or every 2 years? Depends on what it is as to how often we would review it. Because there are some things that we shouldn't complete. They should be ongoing, because things change, and students might have different needs, so just an idea to think about.
Well, and I do think what we want also is kind of the living conversation almost. Like sometimes I think that's where that quarterly review, and there, maybe I'll use the utilized baseline data from ACT long-term goals that actually ties to the aspirational measures as they're, you know, once we kind of, in a lot of ways, once we created the baseline for ACT, we actually have to go back and reflect on all the new assessments and decide what our baseline is there. So sometimes when it's marked complete, that's more like, what's the term, a good education term, commencement, right? That means the beginning of something else, not just graduation on that front. So so there's work behind each one of those. What I think what I want, and this is our first chance to kind of walk through this, and I know with the strategic planning committee, part of that is thinking through what are those other connections. We've really, you'll be very impressed as the NEP data piece comes through, and I'm thinking through what the progress is on data display around different things. I'm anticipating that, and I know the team's kind of working on how do we display that data as it also aligns with the strategic plan. And so, you know, again, you know, either I always will take the blame, but the credit really belongs with a lot of our staff. They're doing remarkable work to make any of this possible, quite frankly. And I am so impressed with how our staff have taken hold of this. Ryan's had a lot of credit on trying to lead on the board fronts on this, but actually everyone in the background is taking a lot of seriousness behind these conversations and deep conversations about how we actually make a difference. That's why you see that in the work, because that's the conversations that folks are having constantly in the department today. So.
Commissioner, I just want to share that I'm very pleased with all of this information. You've gone to a lot of work, and I appreciate that. Just something more on your plate, but it's very much appreciated. And I think in the long term, it'll become easier for you to continue this.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, I think it's a good point. And I appreciated Justin talking about superintendent evaluation, right? And there's another key lesson in that. The work that we've done in Santee, for instance, and some of the work that we do in the agency, they have some parallels, right? I mean, the parallels are several different fronts. The solid function of a board makes a lot of difference. The solid relationship and the clear expectations for a lead administrator in that setting make a lot of difference, because then you can get clear messages for the responsibilities of others in that system, and then you can get clear metrics about the types of things that you want to accomplish, and then you can have dialogue about is that working or not working. And so to watch Santee and to see Steve Moose and Justin up there, and Steve knocking on wood, is it's what Steve has wanted, right? As a board member, like you want things as board members to ensure that that's being done. Getting those systems built's a lot of work. It gets easier, but it's well worth the work because it gets that alignment done and you have impact as a result. And so that works well worthwhile, and I can see that. I hope you can see that too.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll move on to board. Did you have anything further, sir?
Now we'll let Ryan start on something. I think I let Ryan start. I don't know what, or maybe I have.
Board
one more.
priorities and policy research. Ryan Nasby, delegate assembly information.
My computer went off.
So,
2.5.
2 weeks is the NASB conference in Omaha. So it's exciting that Nebraska is hosting that national conference. The schedule is on their website, and so hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at that. Does not apply to your out-of-state travel policy unless you stay in Carter Lake or Council Bluffs. So that's exciting, and I know that you all are planning on participating in a lot of different ways, and we've got a lot of great state representation there. One of the important things that happens, because NASB is a membership organization, you're a member as a state, they have a delegate assembly then on Saturday where matters of business for the organization are taken up. And so President Witzel has appointed Vice President Nichols to serve as the delegate for that. And so my purpose right now is to encourage you to take a look at the delegate assembly packet for the central area, and that is attached in Spark, and review those items of business that are coming before the delegates on Saturday. And by way of President Witzel, I'll say then share your feedback on those with Maureen Nichols between now and that meeting. Any other comments on the conference or that?
Just real quick, I just sent an email to everyone of the final program that's going to print, so you have a copy of that at your fingertips as well. And I'd like to thank Lisa Fricke, who served on the Public Education Positions Committee, and that's probably one of the bigger pieces of business and delegate assembly this year is to adopt the proposed changes in those positions from the committee that she has served on this year.
Anything
Then I'll
further, sir?
move to the second item that I have with respect to the board playbook review. And so 2 months ago, you'll remember that we brought before you a document to review and to take a look at, to think about how that supports you as state board members. It outlines what your constitutional and statutory responsibilities are, as well as looks at some opportunities for stakeholder engagement in particular. And so as a result of that meeting, Maureen Nichols collected feedback on that, and she has shared that with me. And so I will work to synthesize that and share that back with the board leadership. There were conversations then 2 months ago thinking about having a deeper conversation, and so I would encourage you to consider that for your November meeting, where you could set aside some time to further discuss those revisions to the playbook.
Any questions? Seeing none.
And then my last item here is information on the joint Department of Ed and Coordinating Commission for Post-Secondary Education Working Group on Dual Enrollment. And so this might be some new information for some. This has been a project long in the works, like long before even December of 2018, which is where I'm going to start. I think the dual credit, dual enrollment conversation's been taking place for a long time in this state. In December of 2018, the commissioner and I attended, along with Mike Baumgartner from the Coordinating Commission and some other folks from community colleges in Nebraska, an Education Commission of the State's ECS dual credit policy workshop. And as an outgrowth of that, then Mike, with the Post-Secondary Coordinating Commission, the executive director there, really took the lead then in thinking about conversations on dual enrollment between our two agencies. And so an opportunity presented itself to get some technical assistance from ECS. And so President Witzel appointed Patsy Kojans and Lisa Fricke to serve on that. I'll call it a working group is what it is in the agenda. I was going to try to call it something else, a working group. And and then the Post-Secondary Coordinating Commission, which incidentally is chaired by Dr. Freisen in a different capacity for serving as a commissioner on that commission. Then there are two representatives there, John Bernthal and Mary, I'm not going to get Mary's, Lauritsen, and she's from West Point, John's from Lincoln. That group has met 3 times, and we'll meet one more time in November, and then we'll bring recommendations in the conversation forward to their respective bodies. And so I've asked Patsy and Lisa if they would share a brief summary of the information that they've learned as we think about bringing that conversation more to the full board after this working group brings their recommendations.
But I think actually what you said to us is to come to you, thank you, Maureen, come with 2 takeaways from it. And so mine's a little more than 2 takeaways, so you're right about a summary a little bit too. The goals that we set for this committee at the beginning were really an awakening to me. because I think I thought all of them were true already. And so when this group started and their goals were stated, I was like, oh my gosh, we better get busy in Nebraska. It's the 3 goals were there are priorities. Every high school provides access to dual enrollment courses, DE courses. And I would have thought that in 2019, that would have been true. And it's not. Students and parents are aware of DE opportunities. And I thought that certainly has to be true. And then I started asking people I knew, what are the dual education opportunities for your students here in this town? And they would say, I don't know if we even have that at our school. So that reaffirmed that there was a lack of awareness about dual education, and that it was definitely a need, a priority. And student populations are, here's my word again, equitably represented in dual education courses. And we discovered in our studies that that's not necessarily true, that rural schools, there might be some inequity there about who gets to be enrolled in those classes because of lack of teachers, and the people that are working in the schools are already working really hard without having to add to that. So the priorities were really very awakening for me as we started discussing them. And the other equity issue is that, and this is in other states as well, is that kids who are economically challenged or kids of poverty might also be very unrepresentative of kids who do dual credit. And the percentages were low, and even in Iowa, where we look to them for leadership, they are still working on that to make sure that economically deprived kids are able to take those classes. There are a few scholarships, but sometimes the scholarships actually, the students don't know whether they got the scholarship until after they've completed the course. And then that causes all kinds of financial problems for them and for the state. We would like to see every high school provide access to DE courses, and of course students and parents to be aware of it, so that's what we've been talking about. And that all student populations be represented, and that money not be an issue as far as those students who are represented. The one issue that I thought might be really interesting for you guys is, as well as that, our awakenings there, is transferology. The biggest complaint I have ever heard about dual credit classes is, I took this course and now it won't transfer anywhere. Right. And so of course, you never waste time learning, right? That I say that as a teacher, and they look at me and roll their eyes, right? That they'll know what that means someday. But at any rate, this new program out of the University of Nebraska and some of the other public colleges, called Transferology, is actually a website, transfer.nebraska.edu. TES is the abbreviation for it, or the acronym. And it helps you go in as a student or a parent and take a look at the classes that are being offered, and shows where it transfers, to what schools it transfers. And so you can decide whether this is truly valuable course for you to take or not, or will it not transfer any place that you're thinking about going. So I thought, boy, that's a really excellent way to solve that problem, so that we might not be hearing that so much in the long run. Our students and parents will know that their time and their efforts are worthwhile. More than 2 takeaways, Ryan, but I've learned a lot working on the committee, and I'm hoping that we make a difference.
Well, she said some of the things that I was gonna say, so I scrambled in my brain and thought of a couple of other things. We're looking at other models from other states, and I think that's probably a good idea. Iowa and Ohio come to mind. And one of the interesting things I think that will benefit, once teachers are out there teaching, they don't have time to go back and get the number of hours to be able to teach in the field that they need dual credit. So there's an idea floating about doing something in the teacher prep program before they ever teach, so they can get a certificate, so to speak, so that they can teach dual credit once they're hired. And that's just being discussed. It makes sense to me. We'll see. And that transferability is a big issue. And I want to share some things that I learned that might be interesting. There's possibility that Pell Grants might be available for dual credit for low-income students. That's being looked at by some people. I thought that's a great idea. And then dual credit is happening in the trades area. And dual credit concern is if a student, you think it's a wonderful idea that they're in class a half day their senior year and then they go off to work, well, that's a half a day that's lost as school time. So dual credit concern, if students are only in school a half a day, then they are gonna potentially get less funding from the state because that student isn't there. I hadn't even thought about that. So those are some takeaways that I got, not that those are gonna happen, but in the discussion, everything's being put out on the table, and those are some things I thought were very interesting that potentially could happen.
Ryan, correct me, I want to say this correctly, but to be able to teach now dual credit classes, you have to have a master's plus 18 in the area that you're teaching in, right?
So for it to count as a college credit,
Yeah.
The instructor has to have the degree above, and that has to
Well, no.
include those 18 hours. So
Yeah.
the master's degree might include the 18 hours of
Mhm.
history, for example.
Right. And so that's affecting the number of dual credit teachers that we have, and that's a big
And
problem.
the point there is, and Corey, jump in anytime, the point there is that many educators, many teachers receive master's degrees in curriculum and instruction or in school leadership, where the discipline is curriculum and instruction or pedagogy. The discipline is not that of history, right?
If they don't have a master's in the discipline and they have a master's in education, they would need 18 hours in that discipline. But if they have a master's in mathematics, they don't need additional hours. But if it's a master's in education, it would be the plus 18.
And I think it's important to note that that is a Higher Learning Commission accreditation requirement.
Yeah. And another thing was, I thought was important to remember, the demand should lead the offerings in the school. I hadn't thought about that either. So a lot of interesting information given, and I'm so glad that we're trying to make it easier for qualified people, like people who have a master's degree, to get what they need to be able to teach dual credit, especially in the rural areas. So, all done.
So the purpose of this working group is really to begin the conversations between the two bodies, between the Post-Secondary Coordinating Commission and the State Board, to determine what are some of the issues, what is each respective body's role in that, and where do they have some authority and leverage. And then I would see that from this working group's report, the conversation will only continue and grow with the State Board and between the State Board and with the Post-Secondary Coordinating Commission.
Can I make a comment, please? In regards to, I had the opportunity to go to a strategic planning session for Metropolitan Community College lately, where they even had the president there, Randy Schmeisel, and they couldn't overemphasize enough their enthusiasm for the dual credit program. They were very proud of their students who had earned associate's degrees while they were in high school, And they were also talking about the economic benefits in the future of the students, if you will, opportunities to earn these degrees while in high school. So it is really moving forward fast. A lot of enthusiasm.
That's why it's so important, I think, for every kid.
Yes, ma'am. Rachel?
John, and I think you're spot on that comment, and I think I have a couple of questions, and I can email these to you too if you'd like. I think it's great that you're involved in this discussion. I think it's so important to do this work. But I think really having a deep understanding of the difference between dual credit, dual enrollment for academic versus career-based. Metro's example is a great example of a career-based process, and things come into play in a different way when you're looking at that dual credit in a transition to a career pathway that may lead to an associate's degree versus what also happens, which are sometimes like random academic courses. And I don't mean that to say the courses are random, but sometimes it's dependent upon who has that master's plus 18, what a school may offer, and that's what I mean by the random aspect. I think for us as a board to have a better understanding of an academic and a career-based pathway for dual enrollment and what the challenges or obstacles are in that would be really important. I think another piece is understanding some things about uniformity on tuition. I think there's some real discrepancies in what happens by the institutions providing dual enrollment across the state, and that discrepancy or lack of some uniformity, I think, can really be an obstacle to access and opportunity. So understanding the tuition aspect is important, as well as the distribution of scholarship, the A scholarship program, but between colleges and universities that are public providing the opportunity and those that are non-public. And that kind of fits back in with that tuition question. I think really would be beneficial for us to have a deeper understanding of in our role of advocacy and in protection of the young people that are seeking dual enrollment. So thank you for your work.
Thank you, Rachel. Lisa?
Just one thing that popped into my head when you were talking. It was discussed.
Microphone.
I'm sorry. It was talked about where students were taking, this is an extreme that didn't happen, like basket weaving. And the conversation came around to why not just let them have their like for academics, their general education, limiting what could be for credits for dual. So that's in the discussion.
And I'm just gonna have to respond. The career-based is so important. And so you may have said basket weaving, but I'd say welding. I think if we only look at gen eds, we're doing a disservice for career and technical education in the state. We're doing a disservice for really driving the economic direction forward, and we're doing a disservice for the hard work of our community colleges and what they provide. So career-based, to me, is critical, not just gen eds.
I'm looking at those separately as career and technical education, and my comments were directed at the academic side going on to college. To completely different things, both equally important. So please know that that was said, thinking of two separate options there.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much.
We have discussed certification in that as well, so career certifications as well, so I just didn't want to leave that out.
Okay, we'll be moving on to our standing committee reports. With that, Patricia Tim is out today. I'll report on the policy committee meeting. And our first action item is to adopt proposed revisions to the state board position statement S2, accountability for quality education system for today and tomorrow, AQuESTT. The policy committee discussed the proposed revisions recommended by the Strategic Planning, Performance, and Improvement Committee. And Lane Carr, would you please come forward, sir, and give us a very brief rundown?
Thanks.
Thank you,
Hello.
sir.
Back again. So it was exciting because in the previous conversation we were talking about the accountability system and support system as it is. this is exciting to me because we get to talk about the future, envisioning the future of AQuEST. So AQuEST is now at 5 years old, and what does that look like as we push into the future? So that's really what we're trying to set out with this vision. It's been almost a year-long process of getting feedback from multiple stakeholders, the policy committee, the SPPI committee as well. And so thinking about the future of AQuEST, not only as an accountability and support system, but really as a framework for accreditation, a framework for approval, and a framework then for our accountability and support systems as well. So you see that reflected here. We update some of the language in this. And another just very important thing I think we saw on display today with our leaders from Santee, the superintendent and the board president, just the vital role of leadership and how that plays into our education system. So one of the biggest changes here is that we are actually proposing an elevation of leadership to its own domain. So we'll have our 6 tenets, and then we're adding leadership officially as a domain in AQuEST. The other things are just some phrasing changes, and then kind of updating some of the thoughts around specific areas. So really putting for example, with student achievement and growth, formerly the tenet of assessment, we're really thinking differently about assessment, not only as just a measure of one time, but really how we can think about students' growth along those outcomes. That's just one of the examples here. So a lot of vetting throughout the time, lots of discussion around this, and so I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Lane. Does anybody have any questions for Lane Carr? Seeing and hearing none, the policy committee recommends that the state board adopt the revisions at their business meeting tomorrow. Thank you very much. Second action item is to adopt proposed revisions to state board position statement S3, early literacy, formerly reading and writing. The policy committee discussed the proposed revisions recommended by the teacher and learning domain committee. Dr. Epler, sir, can we have your inputs, please?
Thank you. Just a couple quick things about the early literacy position statement. It's really been exciting to see how it's taken shape in a conversation between the policy and teaching learning committee as well. A couple of things that I'll point out is the position statement is in line and aligns with the Nebraska Reading Improvement Act, but as we've thought about implementation of that specific law, it's much bigger than just the implementation of the law. The other thing I might point out specifically is really trying to ensure coherence across multiple parts of our agency, so ensuring that it's aligned with the vision for MTSS and ensuring that it's in line with the supports that we provide relative to teaching, learning, and assessment as well. One thing that I might point out that I mentioned to the committee yesterday that is an interesting addition, an important addition, is the call out of the importance of vision in reading and the importance of ensuring that we are ensuring that students are getting comprehensive eye exams and ensuring that that isn't being identified as a reading deficiency when it may be a binocular vision disorder as well. So yeah, I'll take any questions, but again, appreciate your consideration of the position statement.
Any questions? Seeing and hearing none, the policy committee recommends that the state board adopt the revisions at their business meeting tomorrow. Thank you, Dr. Epler.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our third action item is to reaffirm State Board Bylaw B11, legal assistance. The policy committee reviewed the bylaw and have no substantive changes at this time. The policy committee recommends reaffirming this bylaw with the notes of substantive changes that include replacing general counsel's office with legal services office. Any questions? Thank you very much. We had 2 discussion items. The policy committee discussed upcoming revisions to State Board Policy P1, political activities, use of resources, and will present a draft at the November meeting for discussion. And our second discussion is the policy committee discussed the proposed dates for the state board in 2020. Dr. Ryan, would you care to comment on those, sir?
Sure.
I will never know the Nebraska revised statutes like Brian Halstead does, nor will I know the Constitution and the sections and all of those pieces. But what I do know, and what he often says to help me remember different things, is one of his quiz questions is, how many times constitutionally does the state board have to meet? The answer is 4, right? And because you are an eager and robust group, you choose to meet more often than that. And that practice has been to meet monthly, right? And the recent practice, at least, has been to not meet in July. Your policy says that your meetings will be on the first Thursday and Friday of the month, except for the month of January, which is the first Thursday and Friday after the first Monday. Be grateful for that, because otherwise you'd be meeting on January 2nd and 3rd. So, because you have in your bylaws a meeting schedule, you don't need to, on an annual basis, vote to adopt your meeting structure unless you want to do something different from what the policy states. And so that's why this item is coming to you. And so, last year, you did have a little bit of a deviation in December, for example, to accommodate for around the one-act play competition. I think it's one act in December. That's the first weekend in December. And so what we're bringing, or what we have brought at your direction through the policy committee, is a proposed meeting date structure. There's a few things that I want to point out. And this is for discussion. It's not for action this month. So please give your feedback to Pat, Tim, and the policy committee, because this can certainly be revised based on your wants and needs, or your input, I'll say it that way. The practice recently has been to not meet in January, or meet on Thursday in January. Reason for that, the board reorganizes each January, so you could potentially have a different president, potentially have a different committee assignment. What this proposal does is it puts January 9th, that Thursday, on your calendar for an annual orientation, and some of the topics that I've shared that could be part of that annual orientation are legal review for the board by our legal counsel, Scott Summers and his crew, parliamentary procedure rundown, and by then I might be a registered parliamentarian, and so then it'll be the real deal.
Oh, boy.
Having our, but here's the thing about the parliamentarian, they only advise when called on by the president. So remember that.
Thanks. Pay by the hour.
Our, maybe I'll have to do a separate contract for that, for what a registered parliamentarian gets. Expenses, having our folks run through some expense procedures on an annual routine basis. Also, perhaps having Accountability and Disclosure Commission share some pieces there. And so the intent for the 9th wouldn't be business at all. It would be board procedural things. And then the 10th would be that business meeting as it's been. You'll notice then that for the Thursdays proposed here, that more attention would potentially be focused toward the committee meetings. What I notice is that a lot of great work and conversation is happening in the committee meetings. And I think from having some conversations with you, and certainly having conversations with our staff, it feels rushed sometimes. And so there could be an opportunity there to build in more time for committee meetings, and then have work sessions as needed. So for example, when Santee came today, maybe that would happen still at, let's say, I'm making up ideas, right? But at 3 o'clock that day. So you could have committee meetings, that could happen at 3 o'clock, or it could happen at whatever time. Or Corey often has information items to share, and so that could be scheduled. That would be the only topic then for that work session. What that does then is it puts more time probably into the business meeting on Friday, where the committee reports would happen then on Friday. The thing I think for you to consider in that gives you some time, even if you're a committee chair or committee member, to digest some of what happened in the committee. That can be reported on then at the business meeting, and then the action taken up on it immediately after it's reported on. So those are some considerations, some things to think about. If you look then, I did make a change. Yeah, and so then we've experienced too that committees are being more active throughout the month. And so in July, even though there wouldn't be a business meeting, committees could still meet via Zoom, phone, whatever, as that happened this year. So where the real policy deviation, if you will, comes into play is for November and December. And so following what your decision was last year, for December, you'll notice that one's a little bit later. What we propose here then is a little bit later November meeting, not the first Thursday and Friday, but actually a week later. And the purpose of that then is to try to take up a lot of that end of year business there then in November. December, the board would still have committee meetings and then have a business meeting as needed for that. And certainly recognizing there that that's probably going to be, could be potentially a last meeting for some, and so want to have that public opportunity there. If there was any consent agenda items, the board could convene for that, but it might not be a full meeting, right? It would just depend on what is the agenda and what are the needs for that. So that's the idea with that structure.
Any questions? Thank you, Dr. Ford. And we will take a 10-minute break. Let's convene at 4:10.
Brian Ford completed that.
Yes. First off, we have no action items from the committee for tomorrow, so that's good. The Legislative Committee, we had a very good discussion in our committee this morning. We reviewed written comments the commissioner had drafted after Senator Groney had invited the commissioner to speak at the interim study hearing tomorrow on LR 63, the interim study to examine educational service units. The committee found the written comments of the commissioner to be appropriate. The committee was also informed on meetings the commissioner has had and will continue to have with individual senators prior to the next session of the legislature, and there have been many many meetings with senators. We're very pleased. And finally, the members of the committee are working on building relationships with various senators that we either personally know or want to get to know, to talk about our priorities and what they're interested in. You know, what is it that we can do for them? But just to build our relationships. So that's my report.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you very much, ma'am. I will report on the Commissioner's Appraisal Committee in lieu of Patricia Tim. We had no meeting this month. However, we all would, especially I'm sure all the board members of the committee, would like to thank the Commissioner, praise him for posting evidence of performance standard and indicators as a sampler work for us on a quarterly basis instead of once a year. So thank you very much, Commissioner. Very much. We'll move on to Lisa Fricky. Please report on AQuESTT Teaching, Learning, and Domain Committee meeting.
Yes, sir. Corey Epler and Harris Chain visited our committee and
Mike.
presented. Isn't it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Corey Epler and Harris Payne presented the proposed draft of social studies standards to the committee, and now they will present them to you as a discussion item. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and we
Yes.
want to approve them next month.
Well, I had a presentation up here, but, oh, there it is. Got hidden on me. Thanks for the opportunity to provide an update on the social studies standards, and I know it's 4:15, but I'm gonna say settle in. Just kidding. I did that for John. Did that for John.
He's smiling, so you're okay.
I will say Harris just told me too it's his anniversary. He said so time is money right
happy
now.
anniversary.
We're gonna
Flowers.
move through this, yet also allow time for conversation.
That's right.
Really, what you see today reflects over a year and a half worth of work, and it's always exciting to get to this point. It's always a little bit of anxiousness, but certainly we're very pleased with the draft of the social studies standards that you see before you. This will reflect the public version of draft number 3. It is available on the Social Studies Standards Revision webpage. It was also available in Spark earlier this week. So I wanted just to preview our goal today as we think about our time in this conversation, because we have some things we want to share this month as well as what we want to talk about next month. First is we just want to continue to situate the social studies standards within social studies education and help folks understand the role the standards play in what we expect would happen in a social studies classroom. Want to be able to provide you with an overview of the structure, so as you're looking at the draft in preparation for a vote next month, that you're comfortable with how the standards are structured. And then we want to talk a little bit too about the process that we use to collect stakeholder input and feedback.
So thank you again for allowing us to present to you this afternoon. Social studies education prepares students for college, career, and civic life. I think the standards, some of the feedback we got from the 2012 standards was looking at the idea of rigor in the standards. And so I think if you compared the 2012 to the current draft you have, you would find that in high school they definitely increased the rigor. Careers, there are careers related to social studies. Law is a good example. And in civic life, preparing them for life after high school and civic readiness. The standards are composed of understanding of concepts in civics, economics, and economics includes financial literacy, geography, and history. They're driven by inquiry. And as one of the committee members, Dr. Bauer, likes to say, inquiry means that we're trying to make social studies into a verb instead of a noun. We're trying to get kids to engage in it. And I think that becomes a very good citizenship skill. It creates interdisciplinary connections. The committee has been looking at both connections with science and English language arts, especially in elementary school. Because elementary school, they're generalists. They have a great deal to teach, lots of different standards. And looking for connections and ways to do things interdisciplinary, I think, is something these standards will help to emphasize. The skills emphasize skills and practices as preparation for decision making. Your idea again of civic ready to be a engaged citizen is part of this, and it supports and enhances literacy instruction. Standards must require students to learn fundamental knowledge in civics, economics, including again financial literacy, geography, and history. As one of my mentors used to always say, the kids have to have half a load of hay. You have to have some knowledge. There's no way around that. And it encourages students to participate as informed, thoughtful, and engaged citizens. And it should allow students to develop the actions and dispositions needed to fulfill civic rights and responsibilities. They should not only understand the jury system and how our courts and our structure is set up, but they should also be able to serve on a jury and think critically about the information that's presented to them on juries and be able to make an informed judgment. And that's a good way of being prepared for civic life. And I think the standards help do that.
And we mentioned this in the committee this morning, that these pieces also are called out. This board, gosh, has it been a couple of years ago, took a look at a definition of civic readiness. And so the charge to the writing team when we began this work was to really thinking about that idea of like, what do we mean by civic readiness? But also ensuring that the standards aren't just about content alone, but there's also the ability to apply that knowledge in an authentic setting, and thinking about what that means to be informed, thoughtful, and engaged. So this was part of our charge as we began the process to revise the 2012 standards. We continue to emphasize the difference between standards versus curriculum, and understanding that this board approves standards, which includes 2 levels of specificity, standards and indicators. Always, the local decisions made around curriculum and instructional materials are a locally determined decision. And so as you look at the structure of the standards, the policy document, you'll see it includes both standards and indicators. With that, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the structure of the standards in terms of the document that you see. I mentioned this idea of a standard and indicator. Standards are broad. They're a content-based statement that really gets at the cognitive, affective, or psychomotor learning expectations relative to any content area. And then the indicators provide a greater level of specificity around the content that should be taught. In social studies, we specifically call out examples, and that is a specific feature of this particular set of content standards, which really give guidance around topics that can be included in a local curriculum to help teach the standards and indicators. A challenge with a list like examples is it's tough to be exhaustive. But in that approach and in the work of this revision team is we've really worked to be inclusive, to ensure that the examples specifically provide an opportunity for social studies educators to provide multiple perspectives relative to their teaching of history, economics, geography, and civics. And that's a big part of the work that we've done from version 2 to version 3 is really looking at those examples. providing clarification, providing multiple perspectives, as well as not just providing everything, and really thinking about how we can best support our teachers as they take the standards into instruction.
So the process, again, of creating the draft before you, first of all, it's important to point out that the team utilized the 2012 Nebraska State Social Studies Standards. In 2012, it was a total rewrite of what standards were developed in 2005. And the reason for that was that standards and standard development had changed. There was a lot of other input from different professional organizations around the country. So that was a big change. These set of standards, again, use the 2012 Nebraska State Standards as a base to build upon. The group reviewed evaluations from the 2012 standards. We immediately started getting feedback on terms of the standards. And as Dr. Epler pointed out, one of the major things that came out in 2012 was that some teachers felt there were too many standards. And it wasn't so much too many, but the number of examples in the standards, when you wound up printing them out, they become this gigantic document. And teachers mistakenly would think that they had to do every single example, and they're for example. That's what that means. It's an option. They may use those, but they are there for guidance to try to give teachers in schools help in terms of direction, in terms of looking at curriculum. We were fortunate to have in 2017 a couple different professors from UNO, Dr. Jamie Wagner and Dr. Connie Schaefer, were able to do a statewide study for us of social studies instruction in Nebraska. And again, it pointed out this kind of duality on the standards where a lot of teachers really liked the standards, but again, they thought that there were too many examples. And so those were in the back of the mind of the team as they started last October. We also, last summer, we had Dr. Schaefer do a focus group using Zoom to talk to small groups of educators to kind of drill down and get a more specific idea about what should be worked on. The group also reviewed evidence-based practices from like the National Council for the Social Studies, National Council for Economic Education, the different publications out there in social education to look for what are best practices for social studies. And social studies standards in other states, especially states that had recently updated their social studies standards to see how were they putting these best practices into play.
So if everyone should have a hard copy, and if we didn't get you one, we'll be able to give that to you. It is available virtually as well. But again, as we're talking about the organization and the structure, so grades K-8 are grade level standards. That is a difference between 2012 and 2019 because we did unban the middle grade. We'll talk more about that in just a second, but grades K through 8 are also grouped by disciplines. So by disciplines, we mean civics, economics, geography, and history, which often splits into U.S. and world history as well. The high school is one grade band, but it's organized by the disciplines that you see listed there above. And then we also group the standards by big ideas, and this isn't something that we came up with. This is a research-backed approach relative to how you organize concept themes or issues as you're thinking about backwards design and planning. And then prior to each grade level and at the high school grade band, we offer a summary statement and a theme. And we did this with science, and I think what that really allowed educators to do is just to be able to concisely describe what that grade level looks like. And again, thinking about how knowledge is built and how we scaffold learning across a continuum. And so that, I think, is a nice addition as we really look at the K-12 standards holistically.
So here's an example of what Dr. Epler was just talking about. The discipline is civics. The big idea, the encyclopedia-like type of idea that you're talking about is forms and functions of government. And since this is a fourth grade standard, this would be taught looking at Nebraska studies in fourth grade. So, of course, the civics, form and form of government, would be looking at Nebraska's government and government structures. So the indicator reads, justify the importance of roles that leaders and citizens serve in Nebraska government. And so the 4 examples that are there for schools to look at are the governor, state governors, judiciary. So you've got your 3 branches of government, your traditional type of thing that you would be talking about for foundational knowledge in civics. But you also talk about tribal leaders, different advocacy groups, and different participants that would come and testify at your meetings here. So this is an example of what he's been talking about in the standards.
And one thing I might point out, we've had questions about what changed as a result of the bias review. The addition of tribal leaders is an example of how, as we look at those examples to ensure multiple perspectives relative to the types of structures and functions of government, to become more inclusive and be able to provide that. So I think this also highlights one small example of how a review for bias would allow it to be more inclusive in the standards.
Key differences between the 2012 and the 2019 draft before you. Feedback reflected a need to reduce the number of standards to go after more depth and breadth. And I might also add that the best practices documents that have come out over the past few years in terms of social studies have also emphasized that. So in 2019, our standards are more focused, provide greater depth versus breadth of information that the course would cover that follows the standards. In 2012, standards reflected college, career, and civic readiness. They did then. But what's been added to that is embedded inquiry. Again, asking questions. If you ask a question, you get interested in things. And you want kids interested in social studies. You want them engaged with it. You want them to be able to think about the different aspects of it. Historical thinking skills, where again you look at things like corroboration. Is there more than one point of view on a particular topic? You look at in depth at primary documents to try to take a look at whether or not they're influenced in terms of people's point of view. Academic vocabulary and in civic participation. And again, all of those skills I think are critical for students to be able to do for things again like serving in public office, working on a jury, deciding whether or not to be for or against a bill in the legislature. All of those are really good examples of civic readiness. Middle school standards were written by a grade band versus a grade level. And again, our research department told us that there were 15,000 students a year that were switching schools. We heard from different middle school teachers, and your board has heard testimony as well from middle school teachers that indeed they switched from one school to another. So the idea of having 6th, 7th, and 8th more of a direction as to what that course would look like is guidance for those schools to be able to develop curriculum along that. So if a kid went from one school to another, they'd be able to be getting the same standards. Provisions of 79-724 were often viewed as separate from social studies instruction. There was nothing in 79-724 that you would not be able to find in the 2012 standards, and you will find all of 79-724 in the 2019 standards as well. But the 2019 standards tried to harmonize the revisions. The update of 79-724 with LB 399 gives very specific direction to the fact that schools are to follow the social studies standards, as well as it names the social studies areas that you have before you in this particular draft of civics, economics, financial literacy, geography, and history.
And we did have a conversation in committee today, and we're going to do some work over the next month. And as we come back next month to talk a little bit more about 79-724 and the intersection of the social studies standards within that particular law. That is something we're getting a lot of questions on right now from districts. So we've got some work to do, and then we'll come back next month to be able to talk a little bit more to be able to share how those pieces come together. As we start to wrap up, I wanted to talk a little bit about stakeholder input, and this is something that this board has continued to push us on as long as I've been at the department. And so we continue to refine this process. It's not perfect, but we are pleased with the amount of input that we've received around this process. Before we even began, we asked post-secondary educators to give us feedback on the 2012 standards. We had about 40 responses across our post-secondary system. And then we also opened up a first public input survey where we asked the general public to give us input on the 2012 standards. We had about almost 300 responses. Once the first draft of this set of standards was released, I believe it was in April, we opened up a second public input survey. We received 544 responses. We did close it several weeks ago just simply because we had to analyze the data. Even though that survey closed, there's still a standards input email. There were 348 emails received relative to questions or input about that. We also specifically targeted individuals for feedback, and I'll specifically mention the Nebraska Commission on Indian Affairs and the Nebraska Indian Education Association. As we work to ensure that that voice is present in the standards, we got feedback from both of those groups. And there are other examples of targeted feedback that we sought out as well. The last piece I'll mention is our work around centering equity and standards development. I talked about that last month, specifically around the review for bias. So that's another process to gather stakeholder input and feedback. The thing that's amazing in this is every piece of feedback we received is considered. It's forwarded on to Harris. Harris forwards it on to the writing team, to the leaders, and then in some instances, they may look at a suggestion and it's a no-brainer, like, oh yeah, we're going to put that in there. Others, they may look at it after some conversation, say it's not going to make the draft. In some instances, I think they get in literally to hour-long debates around the input that's received. And I think that's really an important part of our process to ensure that there's multiple voices in this as well. A couple of things I'll point out relative to this second public input survey is we did have around 544 responses in this. I might mention that of this, about a little over half indicated that they were educators, and around 20-some% indicated they were parent or guardians. But I just wanted to call out of all of the total responses, so the 544 represent respondents, the people, but they could provide multiple responses over multiple grade levels. So that's why you see the number of responses. So in looking at the survey as a whole, 77% of the responses agreed that the standards reflect essential knowledge and skills. About 75% indicated that they agreed or strongly agreed that the standards provide clear and specific learning targets. 76% indicated that they agreed or strongly agreed that the standards are rigorous and encourage advanced skill development. And appreciated a good conversation today about some additional analysis we can continue to do with this data, because I think there's so much. We even have some open-ended pieces in there too that would be interesting to continue to analyze. So I would say by and large, favorable response relative to the input that we received. And again, just articulating that we have a process. I know we talked about this last month relative to a process to ensure that when feedback is given, it's considered and incorporated as appropriate. So if that's not enough, I'm going to give you a teaser to next month, because I know you probably have a lot of questions and about some things we didn't talk about today. Next month is kind of, fingers crossed, the culminating event, so to speak. We'll be able to just provide a comprehensive overview of our timeline, offer some reflections from the writing team, and more specifically, we want to talk about the implementation plan and timeline and supports, because getting standards passed and approved by the board is a big step, but the real work starts once they're approved. And thinking about how we support our educators, how we support our schools in implementation of that work as well. I do just want to acknowledge the work that Harris has led. It's a monumental task to coordinate a group, and I will mention the writing team is in Spark. You can see the nearly 70 educators that participated in this. I think Harris said there's been over 70 Zoom meetings well into many evenings, but it's a collaborative effort of our educational system, and we're quite pleased where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really valuable information, the input, everything, so thank you. Only one other thing, President Witzel, was that, excuse me, Brad Dirksen gave us an update on possible changes to Rules 21 and 24, and that was it.
Thank you. Nothing.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lisa Fricke. Patsy Coe-Johns, please report on the AQuEST Student Success and Access Domain Committee meeting, please.
Well, we started thinking that we were going to take a look at the social studies standards and apply the equity lens to it. And then Zainab, who worked with us, Zainab, I don't know if you want to come up or not. Yeah, if you're comfortable there, it's great, but I wouldn't mind having you up here with us. Zainab was our fearless leader today because Ryan had to be someplace else. But at any rate, as we got into it, we discovered that we were repeating history, that the bias committee or bias group had already gone through the social studies standards, so perhaps that would not be a good use of our time. And since all of us are at a point in our life where we value our time, we decided to go a little bit different direction. So the first thing we did is we looked at the equity lens. We talked about what is the future that we want for the equity lens. And we all decided that we didn't want it to be in a book someplace and never taken out and never used. That lens means that it's visible, that you see it, and that was our vision for it, if I can use those words, our vision for it, that the board would be able to see it. And Ryan had taken the original equity lens and been working on it to create something that perhaps could go in front of us. And it's not by any means done, but I think it has a lot of potential for us being responsible, equitable decision makers along the way. And so I'm thrilled that might be a possibility. So the other things that we talked about are where do we go from here with the equity lens? And we thought that this is certainly an opportunity with an equity lens that our commissioner challenged us to create because of his belief in equity and his statements on equity early on. And so we're all pretty passionate about it not dying and going forward. And that's to each person in there stated that that's how they felt about it. Okay? So here are some of the things that we brainstormed that might be potential for us besides having it here for decision makers to use. But what would happen if we asked like NASB and NERCSA and the Gifted Association, some of those organizations that support education, to allow us to present our process to them so that they would see that this process is possible in their organizations if they don't want to use ours, because remember we looked at other ones and said, well, that's not really us, that's not really Nebraska. So to get them interested in it, maybe to decide to use ours. And then, besides presentations, we talked about sharing it through the NDE social media. And then when I saw it pop up there already, I thought, well, we're on our way, but some of the places, Zainab, where did you say it could go?
So we have NDE social media such as Facebook, Twitter, our website as well. And we have David, Jeff's person here, and he can lead us from the communication office, so they can help us with promoting the equity lens.
And then how do we then take that, the next step in our brainstorming after we got done? We're pretty exhausted from all this thinking, you have to understand. So the next step is how do we get it to our educational leaders in our school systems? Of course, we can send emails and that sort of thing. We don't want to be commanding them to use it or anything like that, but we want them to be aware of it and the possible potential that it could have, especially in 2019 when we face all kinds of equity issues in our schools. And this addresses all kinds of equity issues so that they're interested in it. And Robin, you had all kinds of ideas about how it could be used. Do you want to talk about those a little bit?
I think you pretty well touched on them, and John's getting pretty nervous, so I think I'll just pass on that. No, just electronically, we wanted to get it out there. We talked about activities association. How can we have? Did you mention workshops and
Yeah,
things like that through all the educational organizations? Just doing everything we can to increase awareness and become better educated. And you gave. Patsy's, as you guys know, great storyteller, so she gave great stories about her personal experience. Zainab also did, so I don't want you to go into those stories, but they were just fantastic stories that really hit home.
Yeah, we want our schools to be not only be aware of this, but to be using it in leadership and making choices as well. There you go. The end. We don't have any action items except to keep on working on what we can do to implement the equity lens in our decision-making here and in our state.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patsy Johns. Thank you very much, ma'am. I'll report on the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Our action item is to authorize the commissioner to submit deficit budget request for Nebraska Department of Education. And as we briefed at the last meeting last month was about the deficit budget process, including the timeline and the board's role. Commissioner, did you want to brief in regards to some particulars on the budget item list?
Yeah, I think it's just always good, just as a reminder, this is a kind of the routine process for agencies in state government to request additional funds in the middle of a biennium budget, right? And so the deadline for us to do that is coming up here in October. I present this to you. This is a list of items that for the most part were types of things that we requested in our budget request at the biennium time. I think it's smart for us to go back and keep asking for resources. I have learned if you don't ask, you definitely won't get it. That's that side of the equation. There are some things in here that I think are important for us as an agency relative to the kind of the types of work that we certainly want to do, and including Zainab's work around equity. In fact, we're even applying equity lens to the work that we will be doing around budget and alignment with strategic plan, and those types of things are important. There are some things that are hitting us as unexpected types of expenses, or maybe expected, but maybe we didn't know the complete details of that. For instance, I'll just use on-site monitoring for internal controls and support. That's number 2 on here. That's actually an audit finding. The only way we can accomplish that type of work for putting people out in the field to review those types of things are to have like bodies that could actually do some of that work. And so we include that. Certainly some things within ESSA that require us to do things that frankly there aren't necessarily funding sources for unless we request those. a lot of things around AQuEST, and one of my, and again, you've seen today, but our ability to begin to shift resources to build permanent capacity at the agency for the work that I believe we're going to have to do for a long time to support schools is among those requests, and other things that I think support the quality of the education system as a whole. In particular, probably the big number on here is asking for additional special ed funding for the state. It was we ask for an increase every year in our every biennium process. I think we asked for an increase of up to 10%, and it was given at 1%. As you look across the state, even on the conversation we were going to have around special ed needs, that continues to be a challenge, and so we put that in there. I don't expect that we get all of these things funded, but I do hope that there's a good chance to be able to have some interactions with the Appropriations Committee, and I have already sat down with Senator Stinner to have some dialogue around, and he said, well, be prepared to come back with some priorities, which we will as that process proceeds. But I appreciate the action item, and we'll presumably move forward with that list. So
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions? Yeah.
And we discussed in our legislative committee the importance of bringing that up to our senators when we meet with them, the importance of this and what they might be able to do for us.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Commissioner. In regards to the report on the Strategic Planning, Performance, and Improvement Committee, the Commissioner, Dr. Wise, and myself decided it'd be best if we postpone 2.7b and 2.7c until tomorrow to fully cover those items. So those will be discussed and voted on tomorrow. In regards to board reports, dates, and discussion items, Commissioner Bloomstead, you got anything, sir? Nothing in addition. Thank all board members for submitting their monthly report. Board member reports are linked in Spark, and I encourage you to review each member's reports. Tomorrow we will vote on requests to approve attendance at meetings that took place in the past and were not previously approved. There are four board members requesting meeting approvals. The requests for future meeting attendance travel from board members are linked in Spark. Tomorrow we approve the board request for meeting attendance. The monthly board travel expense report is attached in Spark meetings for you to review. This regularly scheduled meeting of the State Board of Education will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning in this room. We are adjourned. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick update.